So we're now starting for the first time to look into the brain. This is before intervention. There's a tiny little red dot here. So not very much of the front of the brain is active in these students. 3 months in, look at how much activation is here. The brain is becoming more efficient. Areas that should be functioning are starting to function. They start to understand their emotions better, right? They, instead of just getting really angry and having these kind of overwhelming feelings, they can actually start to understand and make connections. Oh, if you do this, I get upset because of X. We argue that all the time, that we're changing the learner's capacity to learn. We're not teaching academics, we're changing the learner's cognitive profile. That's exciting because these are really important cognitive skills for success at school and life in general.
You know, doctors or also pediatricians are recommending check out Arrowsmith, and when it becomes in that type of professional discourse, that's really when you know you're doing things right.
This is one of those videos that it feels so big and so important because it is. I'm joined again with the incredible Barbara Arrowsmith Young. And Barbara, you just gave a presentation to the teachers here on the Peterborough campus regarding research that is going to change everything, in my opinion, and I know you feel the same way. I want to just paint the picture and set the tone a little bit for how important this is. I want you to get comfortable. I want you to save this video if you can't watch it right now. Because we were talking afterward, my videographer and I, and he walked into the room and he goes, "This is like change humanity stuff." And I said, yes, it is. This is 100% changing what we thought we knew, and in a positive way. We're talking mental health, we're talking happiness, we're talking overall well-being. This infiltrates every aspect of our day-to-day life, from our children to adulthood. And what we're talking about is Barbara Arrowsmith Young's research on neuroplasticity and changing the brain. So my job today is to try and take all of this scientific research that for a lot of people just seems like, Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 and to make it relevant for them to understand why you need to care about this. Because in a time when education, especially in our province of Ontario, is inside out and upside down, and we're hearing about cuts and we're hearing about all these things, I believe we have the solution sitting in front of us. I truly believe you are the solution to the system and to helping children who learn differently. And I believe everybody learns differently. I know we talk about learning disabilities in particular, but let's get right into it, because one of the first things I wanted to ask you was cognitive versus academic. This is what we were talking about, and this really hit home with me. So can you explain the difference, Barbara, between cognitive versus academic?
So cognitive is really your capacity to learn. So it's the power that you have in your brain to be able to learn things. So the academics are the things that you learn. So academics are like your ability to comprehend what you read, your ability to write, your ability to do mathematics. So it's really skills. It's academic skills that we associate with education, with school, but what allows us to learn those things efficiently and effectively is our cognitive capacity, like our fundamental ability to learn. So we all know that some things are easier for us to learn, some things are challenging for us to learn, and that's based on our cognitive profile of strengths and weaknesses. And to me, what's profound and powerful is that we can actually change the cognitive profile of an individual to allow them to have strengths where before they had areas of difficulty or challenge, and those areas of strength now allow them to learn academic subject material, but not just that, they allow them to learn everywhere in life. So they can learn on the job situation, they can learn in social situations, they can learn in relationships. So the power of starting with the cognitive is the fundamental underpinnings of all aspects of learning.
So Barbara comes from a place, and if you don't know her story, basically in a nutshell, severe learning disabilities.
Yes.
And then you went on to graduate and then graduate some more and overcame countless hurdles when you were told basically you would not even read, right?
Yeah.
Like what did they?
Well, in grade 1, and this was late 1950s, so a long time ago, they didn't even have the term learning disability. So I was told in grade 1 by my teacher that I had a mental block, because that was what they called it. So I actually thought I had a wooden cube in my head that made learning difficult. And I overheard my teacher telling my mother not to have high expectations for me, that I would never really amount to much, that learning would always be a struggle. And I felt like in grade 1 I was given a life sentence of struggle. And the truth was, all of my educational career was a struggle. My mother was an educator. In fact, she won an award from the province of Ontario for her contribution to education. And she decided in grade 1 that her daughter was going to learn how to read and to write and do basic arithmetic. So lunchtime, after school, she gave me flashcards, and eventually I did learn. Like it was, I feel like I was kind of in boot camp starting in grade 1 and became a workaholic very early. But that's what it took for me to learn, was incredible extra effort and energy to do what other students were able to do with ease and efficiency. So the visible signs of the difficulty went away. Yes, I could read now, I could write, I could do basic arithmetic, but the fundamental difficulty was still there. I didn't comprehend, I didn't understand. I lived in fear all the time that, you might say something to me, you might ask me a question, and I'd sit there and I would smile, because I didn't want to look like I wasn't understanding you, but I had no idea what you were asking me. And I would then hope that you would leave me alone and not continue to ask me questions. And then I would go away and I would play over in my head over and over again, what did Michelle say to me? And try to understand it. And by the time I understood it, you weren't still sitting there waiting for me, 2 hours later to answer your question. So incredible social isolation.
Mental health.
Mental health, absolutely. I suffer from anxiety, from depression, and we know the research talks about individuals with learning difficulties have 3 times the incidence of anxiety and depression than the regular population. So incredible cost.
There's just so much to uncover and unwrap here, because it's so profound, and I feel cognitively like I have to make sure you understand all of this because it's so much bigger. So Barbara, you went on and you created these cognitive exercises, the Arrowsmith Learning Program, that have actually changed the brain. We know that so many people out there have heard, this is where you are and there's nothing else we can do. The life sentence, I love that word you use there, because so many parents, so many people after a brain injury, like this research applies to brain injuries, which I find fascinating. Those people who've suffered concussions, those people living with neural disorders, MS. Our brains, everybody has a brain. Mm-hmm. And that's why I feel like this research is so much bigger than just academic. So you went on, you created these cognitive exercises, and now you've put in the time and research because people need the data to do this. And that's what I want to ask you. Why does this research matter?
It matters in that it is showing to people in a way that they can understand the validity of the work that I've been doing for 40 years. I mean, for me, the validity comes in all of the students that walk out of the door of my program, whether in the school in Peterborough, the school in Toronto, we're in 100 schools in 10 countries around the world. That, to me, is all I need. Is I see the transformation in their lives. I see the transformation in my life. I can do things today that, with the best will in the world and incredible effort, I never could have done when I had the learning difficulties. So to me, that's what's meaningful. It's the lives that are transformed. However, the world needs to see something differently. So they need to understand in ways they can the outcome or the benefits of this work. So we are working with researchers at University of British Columbia, Southern Illinois University in the United States. We're actually now working with researchers at Universidad Camilo Cela in Madrid in Spain, and we're going to be starting to work with researchers in Estonia at the University of Tallinn to really start to show the effectiveness of this kind of work. It's a paradigm shift. I mean, currently in education, educators, and I've met amazing educators around the world, their job is to impart knowledge to the learner. Well, if the learner has challenges in being able to access that knowledge currently, then we modify the knowledge. Like we make it simpler, we give it in bite-sized pieces, we change the delivery system, but we're changing the external. We're not actually changing the learner. What I'm saying is, let's step back, let's actually change the learner and give them strengths where before they had difficulties or challenges, so then we don't have to modify the curriculum, we don't have to change the curriculum. That learner with a new cognitive profile, with the new strengths, can step into that classroom and learn like the students that are sitting around without the difficulties. So to me, what this research is doing is demonstrating that first, we are actually changing the brain because we're now imaging and looking into the brains of these students prior to coming into the program, and then at different points through the program. And we're looking at measures, academic measures, so comprehension, writing, numeracy. We're looking at these cognitive measures, so processing speed, seeing that students that might take 5 times longer to do something now can do it in real time, like efficiently and quickly. Memory, we're seeing memory changes, we're seeing verbal fluency changes, but what we're seeing that's driving these changes now that we're looking into the brain are changes in the brain.
The research is there, the numbers are there, and I love what Barbara said when she's showing and presenting. She's like, it's like Christmas for me to actually see everything you knew and you lived and experienced, that you can change the brain. And I hope that somebody watching, anybody watching, if you've been told this is the way it is, and how many people have been given that sort of sentence, you have to flip what our society and culture thought we knew. And that's really what's happening here. These things were huge for me, because when you change the brain, you change your perception, your lens, your mindset. And we live in this world right now where it's almost like trendy, right? It's like, just change your mindset, change it. And so it's like this level, but you're actually giving the solution to implement it from a prevention perspective. We're gonna, instead of reacting, we're gonna start here and prevent it, which is the solution.
I mean, to me it is, and my true vision is that this work should start in grade 1. Every child, as they walk into the beginning of their educational journey, part of their day should be doing cognitive programs, and part of their day should be learning academics, because we learn with our brain. I mean, to me it seems really obvious that if we can strengthen the basic tool that we're learning with, which is our brain, we will produce, enhanced learners. And then all of the difficulties, if somebody is going to struggle, will just be addressed. Like it'll be a normal part of curriculum, because there's still, what really breaks my heart when I go all around the world and talk to students that are struggling with learning difficulties, is there's still such stigma. They're still looked as, you're not intelligent. People start speaking more slowly. So these students feel a lot of shame. If it's just a normal part of curriculum, every student is stimulating and strengthening parts of their brain is just normalized. And as we're seeing, because we've done this in a school in Australia, school in the United States, where we just start in grade 1, 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, one cognitive program. The students in that program outperformed the other grade 1 students that weren't in that program on reading and writing measures. So it's incredibly powerful. Like, change the brain, you change the learner, and then you change the whole trajectory of that learner. We're seeing in the research we're doing changes in social emotional behavior.
That was the one I had so many notes on.
Yeah.
Aggression, the stomach one.
Yes.
She was presenting and I was like,
Yeah.
this is, my stomach hurts.
Yeah, they call it somatization, right? So I have anxiety because a lot of these students have school anxiety. School is really stressful. I mean, for me, I would walk out the front door of my house and my school was like right across the street, and my stomach would start churning. I would get headaches, right? So it's physical manifestation. You're starting to feel ill because of the stress of the learning difficulty, and walking into that classroom every day where you're going to be asked to do things that you know are difficult and challenging, and you don't have a solution. So we see improvement in that. We see reduction in anxiety. We see reduction in depression. We see improvement in leadership, social skills. You know, I remember one of the updated stories I'm writing for my book is a little boy in New Zealand who totally, like, incredibly socially awkward because of his learning difficulties. Like a year and a half into the program, he's now teaching other students that were like him before, that were struggling socially, on how to navigate the social world, because now he's got the cognitive wherewithal to navigate the social world. We're not giving him rules, here's what you do in the social situation. We're actually changing his brain to allow him to step into that situation and figure out what to do. I mean, to me, we carry our brain with us everywhere we go. It's really powerful. If we can change that, then everything in the person's world starts to change.
You just echo everything I believe so deeply. It's why I just think you're such a rock star. There's one thing you can see how much I circled it. Confidence equals competence.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean that's something you hear in this field, and certainly I was told this growing up. I mean, I know my parents loved me, they believed in me, and they told me I was an amazing young woman. But every time I walked into that classroom, that was not my experience, and that was most of my day. So I didn't feel confident, I didn't feel competent, and I wasn't actually competent. So, there's kind of, I think, a belief out there, if we tell the person, oh, you're amazing, whatever, that they're going to feel good about themselves. And I'm not saying don't do that, but if their experience flies in the face of that on a regular basis, that's actually their reality. So what I see this work does is it actually gives the individual the cognitive competence, because now they've got that cognitive power, to be able to engage in the world, to be able to understand things in the world, to have real experiences that make them feel confident because they are competent. Like, it's, to me, that's where real self-confidence comes from, is those experiences of being competent and effective and mastering things. And that's what this work allows these individuals to do.
Salience. I want to talk about this a little bit. This is where we're going to get a little bit scientific. When you're showing the scans of the brain, which first of all I just think is, I don't know why we don't scan everybody's brain. It just, that's a whole other world, Barbara, that I can't wait to work with you. But when we're talking about salience, can you explain what salience means, first of all, for people?
Okay. So there are lots of ways to look into the brain to study it. And one is there's what are called resting state networks. So there are networks, parts of the brain that come together to perform activities or tasks, and there are multiple different ones. And one of the networks that the research is looking at is what they call the Salience Network. So if you think about salience, it's what's salient, what's important. So this is the network that allows you, like, you're in your situation and looking at all sorts of things, and what's important, like, what should I pay attention to? What is critical? What is relevant? So I don't want to look at this butterfly that's flying over here. I need to look at you because we're having a conversation. And we know that students with learning difficulties struggle with that because they get really distracted. They aren't seeing what's important. They aren't focusing on the aspect of their homework that's critical. What we're seeing as the students are going through this program is that network, which in the students with learning difficulties is underconnected, like it's weak in its connections to other parts of the brain, and even the connections within that network is starting to strengthen, which is really exciting. So we are building strength in that area so that the individual can walk into a situation and say, well, actually, this is what's really important here, this is what I'm going to pay attention to, and this is what I need to do. And that's essential for all aspects of learning.
It's huge for me. When I look at that, that's the umbrella for mental health again, because it's that overwhelming feeling when you're like, you feel like there's so many things. Mm-hmm. How do you pick one? How do you know what's important, and how do you start it? Mm-hmm. And so for me to see that your work is actually improving that, mm-hmm. and helping people manage that overwhelming mm-hmm. feeling, because I feel like overwhelming and knowing how to get organized is one of the major causes of people's feelings of unhappiness and low self-worth, and they don't. So this is what I mean. It's just so much bigger than what we're talking about.
It is, and that's why it's not just academics. Like, this is, like, our brain mediates our relationship to the world, and in that relationship it mediates the relationship actually with ourselves, understanding our relationship to ourselves, understanding our relationship to other people, and understanding our relationship to all of the things that go on in the world. Like, it's is that underpinning. And if we change that, then all of these relationships shift in a positive direction. I mean, I understand theoretically why it's doing what it's doing, because I've spent a lot of years investigating this and trying to understand. And I'm still, on a daily basis, humbled by the power of this work and the lives that it transforms. And to me, the most favorite part of my work is when I get to travel around the world and meet people, from 6-year-olds to 70-year-olds that have gone through this program, and to hear their stories and what has changed in their life. And whole families shift, because if you have a child,
effect, yes,
with a learning difficulty, it shapes the whole all the relationships in the family. And now this shift happens in this individual, and then there's all these ripple effects.
We are a hive.
Yes.
We are a hive, and we are co-regulating constantly with one another. So if there's one person in our community, in our society, who's struggling, who's overwhelmed, who can't manage, that impacts everyone.
Absolutely.
So imagine, it's so huge. Brain aerobics, that's what I call what you do in a lot of ways, because I feel like it's exactly, to give people a visual, it's no different really than our physical health. It's, I naturally have nice butt muscles, so I don't have to work as hard at them, but I don't have any bicep muscles, but I'm going to target those. But it's a constant process, it's constantly working, and it's taking care of the whole, It
is, but the nice thing about cognitive change that we've found, because I've tracked people 40 years through this program, is I certainly know when I stop going to the gym, I kind of lose that muscle definition. Yeah. What we see with individuals, they don't have to keep doing these exercises. They get the change, and what I believe is happening is once that underperforming area, so if the area is down here and underperforming, it's kind of acting as a drag on the system, right? We bring this area up so it's functioning. It now gets its own stimulation by working within the neural network. So you don't have to continue to do the cognitive program or the cognitive exercise. It's getting its own stimulation by being engaged in that neural or functional system. And that's what I theorize. I'm hoping that the research will show that. But practically, that's what we see with people that come back 20 years, 30 years out of the program. There is no drop off in function, and they're not continuing to do the activity or the exercise.
It's amazing. So the whole purpose, your fundamental big goal, is to have this implemented into public education. Right now, access to Arrowsmith is, for the most part, private.
Correct.
And there's a few schools throughout the world that have implemented it. Am I right?
They're just in private schools?
Yeah.
It's in 100 schools in 10 countries currently.
Is it in any public schools?
It is in a couple of public schools,
okay.
Yes.
So the goal fundamentally is for everyone to have access for this.
That's the reason I get out of bed in the morning is, if I can build awareness and get, more educators interested in implementing this program. I mean, absolutely, that's my vision, that every child should have access to this no matter where they are. We're now looking at seeing if we can develop some remote deliveries of the program, because, they're individuals that can't get into a school where the program is developed. So I'm constantly looking at how can I push the envelope in terms of making this work more accessible. So we've been trialing a program for a year in my school in Toronto, where we have a facilitator that Skypes in with people in Thailand and Germany and Switzerland to train them in one of the programs that we're seeing a lot of improvement in, that some of the imaging studies were looking at, the one that changes the Salience Network. And we're seeing what can we learn from doing that remotely, and then maybe being able to offer it more broadly. I mean, that is my vision and mission, is to make this work more accessible, because it actually alleviates human suffering. These individuals suffer in some way, and the people around them then suffer. And that's my rallying cry, is to alleviate the suffering. And we're now actually, I think you'd mentioned, working with some individuals with acquired brain injury out in Vancouver. It's an initiative, the Watson Center Society for Brain Health, that is starting to use 4 of my programs for kind of the higher order functions, for reasoning, problem solving, nonverbal understanding of the world. And we're doing research at the University of British Columbia with researchers that specialize in that area and seeing the same kinds of changes that we're seeing with individuals with learning difficulties. We're seeing those changes in the brains of individuals with traumatic brain injury, and these individuals who haven't been able to work are now being able to go back to work and be engaged in the world.
And stay at work.
And stay at work.
I mean, the research is like 88% of these people who did your program with acquired brain injuries transitioned back to work within a month of discharge, and they a year later are still all working.
That's correct. And in the general literature, it's 40%. So that's like double the rate of success of being able to engage in the world. And we're seeing in this group also reduction of anxiety, reduction of depression, and increase on measures of quality of life, right? And I mean, one of the individuals that I interviewed for the revision of the book was an elementary school teacher. He was, hit by a impaired driver with traumatic injury in the program for, I think, 7.5 months, and now has returned to working in an elementary classroom, whereas he wasn't able to work before, because you think about an elementary classroom, there's like so much going on, and he couldn't filter out what's critical, what's important. He's now able to do that, and he's now back in. And he says he has more compassion for the students that are struggling in his class, and his students know that he was in this kind of unusual program. So they say, Mr. Weber was in boot camp, or brain camp, sorry, call it brain camp. So that little ripple effect, I mean, he's now a more compassionate teacher because of his experience, and now he knows that there's a possibility for his students, not with traumatic brain injury, but with learning difficulties, to have a different possibility.
What is the best way for us all to make this publicly accessible? What do we have to do? What is the call to action for people watching, Barbara, whether you're an educator, a parent, a grandparent? How do we get these cognitive exercises, this programming, available in the public school system?
I think it's knocking on doors. I mean, I think about this group of mothers in Atlanta, Georgia, several years ago, and they labeled themselves Mums for Arrowsmith, and they just went and knocked on, I don't know how many school doors, and talked to educators and saying, I want you to look at this program. Actually, educators listen to parents, they listen to grandparents. That's their constituents. And I think it's have a voice. Go out and say, you know what, I've heard about this program. My book, The Woman Who Changed Her Brain, is very powerful for educators to read. Just hand the book to somebody that you think maybe might be open to looking at this program. I think it's building awareness, because there's so many people out there that still are in what I call the pre-neuroplastic paradigm. They're still living in that belief, even though we know the brain can change, that actually it doesn't have practical application. So they've kind of heard this out there somewhere, but they're living in a world that, no, the brain is fixed, nothing you can do if there's a learning difficulty.
It's the way I am, just the way it is.
Exactly, you have to live with it.
It is what it is.
Yeah, and you have to compensate, which is incredibly challenging, and it takes effort, and you get exhausted, right? Whereas here you can shift the learner. We have this idea in education, I think, still, that the learner's this black box, right, that we can't do anything about, right? And each black box might be a little bit different, so you might have some strengths I don't have, I might have some strengths you don't have, but ultimately is fixed. And my job as an educator is to ensure that this black box gets filled with what it needs to get filled with. So I'll change things outside of the box to ensure that it can go into the box. What I'm saying is, actually, we're going to change that box. Like, we don't have to leave that box the way it is. We can actually change the box, so we don't have to change the external. We change the box, it can just walk out and learn everywhere.
You knew or know what so many philosophers figured out thousands of years ago. And you can't change that around you. You can change how you react to that around you. But what is defining about you and different is you have the science and the data to solidify what so many people theorize about. So now it's undisputable, I guess. And that is what is so exciting moving forward for you. I want all of you to watch this. I want you to go to your schools. If they go to the schools, if I'm a parent and I go to my children's school and I say, listen, I really would love to see this Arrowsmith programming implemented Where do I direct them? I need specific calls to action.
Yeah, so the specific call to action is contacting us at Arrowsmith School in Toronto, so it's arrowsmithschool.org. We have staff that's their job. They talk to educators, they talk to professionals. So it would be like pick up the phone, go to our website, arrowsmithschool.org, email, I think it's info@arrowsmithschool.org, call, and we have a whole advocacy steps that I think are also on our website, because we've learned from parents and how they advocate and what the best ways to advocate. So we've got all that outlined in terms of the steps, and we have staff that are happy to speak to educators, happy to work with parent groups to advocate for this work. But I think it's going to be grassroots. I mean, that's where it's going to come from. It's going to come from parents saying, I want this for my child, and if enough parents say that, and that's how a lot of the schools have started around the world with this work. It's parents going and saying, I want you to look at this.
It is how everything happens. It really is. We may or may not use this part, but the money aspect of it, is that where people is that a fundraising thing? Is that lobbying to our politicians to change budgets? How is it? Because ultimately it's so political at the end of the day when we get down to education, and it's dollars and cents. And that's why I think this data is critical, because you can see the investment and the return on investment.
I think it's the short-sightedness of our political system. I mean, there was a brilliant study, and it was actually done here in Canada. It's called PACFOLD, Putting a Canadian Face on Learning Disabilities. So that's PACFOLD. So if people just want to Google that. And it was done by the Learning Disabilities Association of Canada. They looked at all sorts of data. And one thing they looked at, the cost of having a learning disability from birth to death. And they estimated, and they had accounting firms look at it, about $500,000 for one individual, some borne by society, some borne by parents. Then they looked at the cost of mental health, and that was where they looked at 3 times the rate of mental illness. They looked at employability and looked at these individuals tended to be underemployed or non-employed.
Or taking more sick days, which costs the company more money.
Exactly. Or relationships. They looked at, they tended not to be in long-term relationships. So to me, the cost to society is untenable. And you're not going to be spending this money forever. So we go into school system, our fee is $4,500 Canadian dollars per student for 10 months. That covers all the programs. It covers all the assessments, everything. I mean, parents often are paying more than that in tutoring for a year. So
do you know how much a psych assessment cost me? I mean, if you want to get into the nuts and bolts of politics and the education system and the money, these are real discussions.
And this might be a 2-year program, a 3-year program, a 4-year program, but at the end of this program, there's no more cost associated, and now that person is engaged in society. I mean, I spoke to the New Zealand Parliament a few years ago, saying, we're developed countries, how can we say that this is okay to not put this investment in, our children, because they're our future? It makes no sense to me. It's kind of thinking we're going to save a few dollars here, but the cost, if we think about it, $500,000, that's incredible, where we maybe spend $20,000, at this point. And it's not even that, because now that person will be engaged and contributing member of society, right? It's just, anyway, it boggles my mind.
Your passion comes from a genuine, authentic, true source of your own pain and suffering, and now you know how to correct it. And for that reasoning, I applaud you, and I am your biggest fan, because I know where it's coming from. It's coming from passion and genuine drive to help, because you can. I read a thing, it said, my responsibility is your response and your ability. That is what
I like that.
responsibility is.
Yeah, well, and my father, I was very blessed in my parents. My father was an inventor and a scientist and had all sorts of patents, and I didn't quite understand what he did, but he told me when I was quite young, he said, if there's a problem in the world and there's currently no solution, and you're part of that problem, he said, it's your responsibility to find a solution. And then he said, the rest of the world tells you you can't do it. He says, don't be limited by conventional wisdom. He said, this is how science goes forward. He said, you go out and do it. And I feel like, the gauntlet was thrown down at that early age. I had no idea how I was going to do it or if I was going to, but that was my challenge.
I'm with you. As a mom, I'm with you. As a mom who sees these teachers who need help, the educators, the parents, the children, I'm with you on your grassroots movement, and I think we can. You are the proof to help change the trajectory in our whole hive, make the hive healthy. Barbara Arrowsmith Young, thank you so much.
Thank you.